Before we dive in, tell me where you're listening from and what pulled you into this story. If it spoke to you, drop a comment. Your words help keep history's forgotten voices alive.
Picture the English Channel in the 1340s. Cold, violent, forever shifting like a creature that refuses to be tamed. Fog presses low across the water, and somewhere in it, a black ship cuts through the waves with a speed that shouldn't be possible. Its sails are red, blood red, a warning more than a color. At the bow stands a woman. Her hair is tangled in the wind, her jaw set like carved stone, and in her hand is an axe, the same axe she used on every French noble she could get her hands on. Sailors whisper her name like a prayer or a curse. Jeanne de Clisson, the lioness of Brittany, the woman who hunted the French navy for vengeance. But before she commanded ghost ships and vengeance fleets, before she became the terror of the Channel, she was something that history likes to pretend women never were: a noblewoman, a wife, a mother, and then a widow made by a king's betrayal. To understand how Jeanne de Clisson became the most feared pirate of her era, you have to walk into the moment her world ended, the moment the king she served murdered the man she loved. Her story doesn't begin on the sea, it begins at a scaffold. Jeanne de Clisson, the pirate who hunted kings. Blood in the Channel, how one woman declared war on France. Jeanne de Belleville was born into privilege, yes, but not into power. Breton politics in the 14th century were a pressure cooker. France pulling from one side, England pulling from the other, Breton nobles trapped in the middle. Her marriage to Olivier de Clisson, wealthy, respected, bound by oath to France, should have protected her from danger. It didn't. In 1343, during the chaos of the Breton War of Succession, Olivier was accused of treason. Evidence? Thin. Motive? Convenient. The French crown needed an example, and her husband was the perfect target. He was seized, tried in secret, and executed by beheading. No trial by peers, no appeal, no justice. The king sent Jeanne her husband's severed head in a wooden box, a final insult meant to silence her. It didn't. It ignited her. Most widows wept. Jeanne sharpened steel. This is where she became the woman history couldn't handle. Grief carved something new into Jeanne, something feral, something unstoppable. Standing over Olivier's bloody remains, she swore an oath that would shake kingdoms. "I will destroy the men who destroyed my husband." She sold everything she owned, including her castle. She armed loyal men. She bought ships. And she painted her sails the color of vengeance. The red-sailed fleet was born. Her first targets were land-based: French garrisons, caravans, tax collectors. Jeanne struck fast, without mercy. Survivors spread rumors of a noblewoman with fury in her eyes and an axe in her hands. But the land wasn't large enough for her vengeance, so Jeanne took to the sea. And that is where her legend truly begins. The French crown thought Jeanne would vanish. A widow with no fortune, no status, no army. She should have slipped into the background, the way broken women are supposed to. She should have buried her husband, clutched her surviving children, and waited for the world to forget her. Instead, Jeanne sharpened herself. Gone was the noblewoman who once poured wine at banquets and stitched banners for tournaments. In her place stood something new, someone the kingdom had no script for. A woman with a vendetta and an entire coastline to aim it at. She sold nearly everything she owned: land, jewels, furniture, tapestries, and poured it into war. She bought her first ship, a small, fast vessel tight enough to slip through narrow channels. Then she bought a second, and then she painted their sails the color of blood. The fishermen who saw her new fleet whisper a single name: La Flotte Noire, the Black Fleet. But it wasn't black. It was red, deep red, like the fabric of royal banners, or, as some swore, like the color of her rage. People would remember it later as a ghost story. Red sails cutting through fog, a female captain standing at the prow with her hair whipping like a battle flag, hunting French nobles the way sharks hunt wounded fish.
But Jeanne wasn't a ghost.
She was painfully, terrifyingly alive. She trained her crew, not soldiers, but men who had lost husbands, sons and brothers to French injustice. Men who needed something to believe in. Men who, the moment they heard Jeanne's vow, followed her as if she were a prophet rather than a pirate. Her flagship was christened Ma Revanche, My Revenge. Not subtle, not diplomatic, but very, very honest. Men called her vengeance unnatural because they expected women to be silent. They had stolen her husband, she would steal their peace. Jeanne learned the sea the way she learned grief, with discipline, with fury, and with no margin for error. She became fluent in tides, in wind, in the way a ship breathes when it turns. She learned how to strike fast and disappear faster. She studied the merchant routes along the English Channel like a hunter, memorizing tracks in the mud. Then she waited. She didn't wait long. The first French ship she caught was heavy with soldiers and officials, noblemen dressed in brocade coats and arrogance. When they saw who commanded the red-sailed vessel approaching, some laughed. Some prayed. All died. Jeanne made sure of it. She spared the sailors, the poor, the powerless, the ones who had no say in the wars of kings. But every French noble who stepped onto her deck died with Jeanne's vow in their ears. It wasn't a massacre. It was a message. And it travelled. By midsummer of 1343, the French Channel was a place of whispers. Captains checked the fog for a flash of red. Soldiers refused to board ships without triple escorts. Priests blessed crews before departure. And on the cliffs of Brittany, mothers told their children this warning: "Be good, or Jeanne de Clisson will find you." She became a myth in real time. England took notice. King Edward III understood something the French refused to see. Jeanne wasn't a criminal. She was an ally with fire for blood and a personal vendetta that aligned perfectly with his own. He welcomed her, protected her, gave her safe harbor. Jeanne accepted his support, but not his command. She would fight with England, not for England. Her war was personal, not political. Still, the alliance made her stronger. Her fleet grew, her reach expanded, her enemies multiplied. She didn't need a king to knight her. Vengeance had already crowned her. For 3 relentless years, she hunted the French across the Channel. She struck at supply ships, troop transports, royal envoys, any vessel carrying those who served the king who killed her husband. Noble heads rolled into the sea. Survivor accounts blurred into nightmares. And through it all, Jeanne stood on the prow of Ma Revanche, a silhouette against the storm, a sword in her hand, the wind grabbing her cloak like wings. But even legends bleed. A storm broke her fleet apart one terrible night off the coast of Brittany. Waves the size of cathedrals slammed into her ships. Men were thrown into the black water, swallowed before they could scream. Jeanne's vessel shattered against hidden rocks. She survived only by clinging to a broken piece of mast, and to her 2 sons. They drifted for days. No food, no fresh water, no shelter. Just open sea and a horizon that refused to offer mercy. When a passing English ship finally found them, Jeanne was half-conscious, her hair matted with salt, her arms wrapped around her boys like she expected the ocean to reach for them again. One son died soon after. Even the sea, it seemed, wanted something of her. But Jeanne did not quit. Women like her never quit. The moment she recovered, she rebuilt. She returned to raiding, returned to hunting the French, returned to the one thing grief had carved into the center of her being, the vow that defined her life. And now? Now the French crown finally understood the truth. Jeanne wasn't a widow seeking justice. She was a storm, and storms don't negotiate. For 3 years, Jeanne de Clisson turned the English Channel into her personal hunting ground. 3 years of red sails and dead nobles. 3 years of fear spreading faster than any royal decree. But vengeance is a hard fuel. It burns bright, then burns everything else with it. And Jeanne, for all her fury, was still human. When the great storm shattered her fleet and took one of her sons, something inside her cracked. Her war wasn't over, but the fight began to change shape. from wildfire to a slow, simmering heat. England welcomed her again. King Edward III received her like a knight returning from victorious campaigns, not like a pirate whose name was soaked in French blood. Some say he offered her a pension. Others say he offered her a place at court. Still others claim he asked her to train English captains because she had mastered tactics their admirals couldn't match. Jeanne accepted hospitality, but not titles. She had no interest in becoming a pawn on a different king's board. That's the part people always misunderstand. Jeanne wasn't driven by politics, she was driven by memory. Memory of a husband kneeling on a scaffold for a crime he didn't commit. Memory of sons pulled from her arms. Memory of betrayal wearing a crown. If she fought for England, it was only because England allowed her to target the men she truly wanted. But even storms settle eventually. And so Jeanne did something no one expected. She remarried. Not to a noble of France, not to an English lord, but to a quiet, wealthy English knight named Sir Walter Bentley. A man who didn't use her, didn't fear her, didn't try to make her into a political tool or a symbol. She married him for peace. Peace, something she hadn't tasted since the day she watched Olivier march toward death. She retired from the sea. She laid down the sword.
She held on to her remaining sons with a ferocity that frightened even her friends. And for the first time in almost a decade, Jeanne de Clisson slept without scanning the horizon. Historians often skip this part because it doesn't fit the legend. They want her to die in battle. They want her to sink beneath the waves with red sails fluttering over her. They want her to be a tragic goddess of vengeance, not a woman who dared to build herself a second life. But Jeanne didn't exist to satisfy storytelling symmetry. She lived. She loved again. She laughed again. She became a mother and a wife again, just not the way she had before. This time there was steel under her softness. This time she chose the life, not the role. Her final years were spent in quiet prosperity in Brittany, a land that had once betrayed her, and then, oddly, became her sanctuary again. She owned estates. She raised her children. She died around 1359, in her 50s, peacefully, privately, unceremoniously. It is almost comical, really. A woman who once terrified the French crown dies quietly in a bed. But that is the thing about Jeanne. She didn't need her death to be dramatic. Her life had already shaken empires. History likes neat endings. Jeanne preferred real ones. She lived long enough to outlast the men who killed her husband. And in the centuries afterward, the legend did exactly what legends do. It grew. The French called her a demon. The English called her a heroine. Sailors told stories of red sails glowing in fog. Mothers whispered her name to scare children into obedience. Brittany sang ballads of the lioness who hunted kings. But the truth is simpler and far more beautiful. Jeanne de Clisson was a woman with nothing left to lose. And women like that? They change the world before the world ever sees them coming. Long after Jeanne de Clisson died in her quiet Brittany estate, the world kept retelling her story, and depending on who held the pen, she became something different each time. To the French crown, she was a traitor, a murderer, a pirate, a woman who refused to accept the divine right of kings, and therefore needed to be erased. To England, she was a weapon, a symbol of resistance, a rallying cry for a war that would drag on for a century. To Breton storytellers, she was something else entirely, a ghost-wrapped hero who refused to bow to injustice, the lioness who hunted the wolves who devoured her family. But beneath the layers of propaganda and folklore lies something sharper, something modern readers recognize instantly. Jeanne de Clisson was one of the first recorded women in Europe to weaponize her own rage. And the world didn't know what to do with that. History forgives men for vengeance. It fears women for the same thing. Because think about it. Men start wars over honor. Men duel over betrayal. Men burn cities over insult. But a woman who does the same, she becomes a monster, a myth, a warning.
And yet Jeanne never fit the monstrous mold. She didn't fight out of bloodlust. She didn't crave carnage. She wasn't hungry for power. She wanted justice in a world that had none to give her. Her husband was executed for a crime he didn't commit. Her children were stripped of protection. Her family was shattered. Her government betrayed her. When a man responds to that, we call him heroic. When a woman responds, we call her unhinged. Jeanne proved them all wrong. She built a fleet. She built fear. She built a legend. What she didn't build was a crown. And maybe that's the part modern audiences love her for most. She didn't want to rule. She wanted to be heard. The political ripple effect. Jeanne's war may have been personal, but its impact was massive. Her attacks destabilized French military supply lines during the early years of the 100 Years' War. She undermined morale, forced costly naval reinforcements, and, ironically, became a tactical problem England bragged about solving simply by letting her exist. Her actions became a case study for guerrilla naval warfare. Her legend inspired later female privateers like Grace O'Malley. And her story became a quiet embarrassment for French historians who preferred their women obedient, silent, and saintly. She was none of these. The myth of the red sails. By the 17th century, Jeanne's story had grown into a Gothic fable. Red sails cutting across fog, a woman dressed in black at the prow, a silver goblet of blood raised to fallen sailors, a whispered curse on French noblemen. None of that is historically confirmed, and yet all of it feels emotionally true. The Lioness of Brittany wasn't a pirate because she loved the sea. She became one because the land had failed her. When justice closes its doors, rage finds another route. The woman behind the monster. Strip away the myth, the fear, the propaganda, the centuries of retellings, and what you find is a woman who lived 3 lives. A noble woman, respected, wealthy, devoted. A widow made into prey, watching her world collapse. A privateer commander, feared across 2 kingdoms. But her final form is the one history tried to deny her, a survivor. She lived long enough to rebuild her life. She lived long enough to love again. She lived long enough to choose peace after choosing war. That is rare. Even rarer is what comes next. The modern reclaiming of Jeanne. Today, Jeanne de Clisson is not studied as a villain, not dismissed as a pirate, not reduced to a caricature of feminine fury. She has become something larger, an icon of what happens when women stop asking for justice and take it instead. She is a symbol in feminist literature, a folk hero in Brittany, a character in novels and films, a name spoken alongside women like Boudica, Tomoe Gozen, Joan of Arc and Grace O'Malley, women who mounted the world's expectations like horses and rode straight through them. She was not the monster history warned about, she was the warning. And that brings us to the last truth, the one that makes Jeanne unforgettable. Jeanne de Clisson didn't survive because men allowed it. She survived because she refused anything else. And a woman who refuses to break is the most dangerous force on earth.
As the shadows lengthen and the stars begin to whisper, we close the pages of this ancient tale. In the hush of night, truth rests where faith once stood strong. Sleep gently now, wrapped in the echoes of empires long gone. Until next time, when darkness falls and another lullaby of a fallen world begins.